We've got a major update now on the terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge. A short time ago, I sat down with Grayzone reporter Kit Klarenberg, who has a bombshell story. Watch. Well, over the weekend, Ukrainian special forces carried out a terror attack on the Kerch Bridge to Crimea. Did they do it by themselves? That became the immediate question. It didn't seem like they would have been able to carry this out by themselves. Or did they have help from NATO or other Western powers? Well, now we have our answers. Thanks to investigative journalist Kit Klarenberg from the Grayzone, Kit obtained leaked government documents from British intelligence spies that shows the United Kingdom was working directly with the Ukrainian special forces to carry out the attack on the Kerch Bridge. Kit Klarenberg, investigative journalist from the Grayzone, joins us now. Kit, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
When did you learn about the British involvement in this attack?
I mean, in the immediate aftermath of the truck bombing, there was a very revealing article in The Cradle, which I urge all of your viewers to follow regularly. They put out excellent content. It was authored by an analyst called Pepe Escobar, and it effectively talked about how he'd been informed by a source within the Russian intelligence services that it was likely to have been Britain's foreign intelligence service, MI6, that was involved in this. I think that Britain's role in stirring up the Ukrainian war and pushing Kiev to engage in dangerous escalations is a story that's little told and little understood, but is very, very obvious. So, being in possession of these documents, which showed that back in April, at the precise time that Boris Johnson was doing everything in his power to sabotage what had, to that point been successful peace talks between Kiev and Moscow. He specifically flew to visit Zelensky and told him, "We're not ready for you to back down yet." There were this constellation of British military and intelligence officials, veterans like Chris Donnelly, who was a long-time NATO Secretary General advisor, Guy Spindler, who's a long-time MI6 officer who was posted in Moscow at the top, in the late 80s and early 90s, at the same time as Christopher Steele, author of the dodgy Trump-Russia dossier. I can't say that I was at all surprised. And yes, at precisely this time when the sabotage is being undertaken, they are plotting a major escalation of the comprehensive destruction of the Kerch Bridge. The explosion which took place on the 8th of October, I mean, it pales in comparison to what was put together by this rather shadowy and obscure veteran British Army operative Hugh Ward at the request of Chris Donnelly. And this was a wide-ranging plan to completely cripple the bridge. No consideration for civilian casualties, which would have likely been high. That bridge is used by tens of thousands of people, pretty much daily, going back and forth. I mean, there was a lot of talk about the recent Russian missile strikes, which remain ongoing against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, about how it was the missiles were raining down at rush hour. If that bridge had been hit even by the truck bomb at rush hour, then deaths would have been in the hundreds, in the thousands very easily. So I mean, yes, a completely reckless disregard for human life and civilian casualties, and indeed the almost certain likelihood that this would have triggered an absolutely massive retaliation from Moscow, which again, what actually took place on Monday and again continues to this day, it pales in comparison to what they would and could have done.
So it seems, a couple of questions popped to my mind. Number one, this was a provocation then, right? This was on purpose to get Moscow to retaliate. No?
Yeah, I mean, there is that sense of it. I mean, I also just genuinely think that Zelensky's Western backers and advisors just have no care or consideration for the consequences whatsoever, because it's not going to be felt in London or Washington. It's going to be felt in Kiev and other cities like Lviv. But I think there is an element of, there was a lot of bluff calling, and particularly given that in the since this much vaunted Kursk encounter counteroffensive started in September. The Ukrainians have recaptured a not insignificant swathe of territory. Although there's analysis by Jacques Baud, who's a former Swiss intelligence officer, who says that this was actually it's actually been rather disastrous for the Ukrainians, because they are attacking areas which are effectively hollowed out and have very few Russian and allied troops in them, and they're still losing thousands of soldiers. I mean, to paraphrase Mao, territory can easily be recaptured. Experienced, trained, battle-hardened soldiers are very, very, very difficult to replace, and I mean, they literally cannot be replaced immediately. So I think that these gains from the Western perspective perhaps emboldened the Ukrainians and their Western backers to carry this out. And I think there was a symbolic element to carrying it out on Vladimir Putin's 70th birthday. I mean, when Putin opened the bridge in 2018, he praised the miracle of its construction, and suggested that he had fulfilled the dreams of czars and commissars before him. And yes, in its immediate aftermath, there was much celebration. And a senior Ukrainian intelligence official posted on Twitter a video which contrasted Marilyn Monroe singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to John F. Kennedy to a video of the bridge in flames. And then, miraculously quickly, there was a commemorative postage stamp of the bridge on fire was released in Ukraine, which does tend to suggest that they were waiting to do this for a very long time. I mean, whether they've been waiting since April isn't clear, although there are clear indications from the content that the Grayzone came into possession of that this mad proposal to completely destroy Kerch Bridge was shared with Ukrainian security and intelligence services at the highest levels.
That's what I was wondering as well. I mean, you talked about if this plan had actually carried out the way that, according to these documents, it would have been absolutely devastating. And this commemorative stamp comes out by the Ukrainian Postal Service almost immediately, showing multiple explosions. It seems it's, this coordination of having a stamp printed that you could get your photos taken in front of, taken selfies of. It seems like obviously this was planned. So can we glean anything from those postage stamps? Was that to be the case, that there were to be multiple explosions at either end of the bridge, and that didn't happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, the plans themselves that the Grayzone has reported on, they talk about targeting specific sections of the bridge which are effectively in shallow water. And Hugh Ward, this Dr. Strangelove-esque figure, suggested it would be easy using specialist scuba divers or underwater drones to attack and destroy these. So yes, I mean, the fact that there are two explosions at either end of the bridge is in the hastily released commemorative postage stamp does tend to suggest that that was the original plan, and there's a direct parallel there. I mean, perhaps it was decided that it would be too difficult. I mean, in the manner it was carried out, using a truck, allegedly it seems the driver was unwittingly carrying a vast amount of explosives and had been hired to ferry some fertilizer from Bulgaria to Crimea. I mean, that in itself does tend to raise questions about whether there was a British hidden hand in this. I mean, in several major terrorist attacks in the UK in recent years, there have been clear indications that the perpetrators were unwitting, in the sense that they didn't realise they were on a suicide mission. On the July 7th, 2005 tube and bus bombings in London, all of the alleged terrorists bought return tickets, which suggests they thought they were coming back home after doing whatever it was they were doing in London.
Unbelievable. And that was going to be another question I had, was the driver of this truck unwittingly a participant in this? And that just speaks to the horror of this, that the British, the British intelligence, along with Ukrainian special forces, thought, this is great. We can take an unwitting citizen, a civilian, load up his truck with explosives, and he won't know anything about it, and we'll wait to make this detonation. Just speaks to the horrors of this event.
Yes, absolutely, and I think it's just it's really quite extraordinary. So the kind of the outpouring of euphoria, or about what was could plausibly be argued to be a grave war crime, which claimed the lives of innocent civilians, and as I said, if it had been conducted at rush hour, would have meant a lot more dead people, and yes, a far more brutal response. I mean, I do think that total disregard for consequences now is kind of filtering along from London and Washington, because they believe they have the unquestioning and unconditional support of their Western backers. There are very clear indications that that's not true. I mean, it doesn't make logical sense. I mean, the day will almost inevitably come when Ukraine is one way or another thrown under the bus. It's just a matter of when. I mean, I think apart from the most insane hawkish excesses of Western military and intelligence services, of which the people who plotted this bridge destruction, are a palpable manifestation. I don't think that the more sober people in the Pentagon or MI6 actually want nuclear war, and that is a very obvious outcome of continuing to escalate an already dangerous situation.
You mentioned the author of this. So who authored the blueprint for this terrorist attack?
Well, it was drawn up, as I say, by Hugh Ward, who is a veteran British military operative. But it was commissioned by Chris Donnelly. I mean, Chris Donnelly has been heavily involved in stirring up tension in Ukraine ever since the Maidan coup, if not before. In March 2014, he put together this appalling and just completely reckless plan, which would have involved mining Sevastopol harbor, destroying the Russian Air Force parked parked on Crimean airfields. And he mentions, "I'm trying to get this message across." I mean, quite who he was trying to get it across to isn't clear from the document itself. But again, it would be unsurprising if he had direct ties to the kind of post-coup government and the Ukrainian security services. And there's a very interesting character who crops up in the leaked emails which accompanied this document, called Audrius Bukavicius, who is he was a Lithuanian anti-communist activist who led the kind of 1991 revolution, and in doing so he directed his comrades into the line of Soviet sniper fire, knowing that they would be killed in order to inflame tensions and kind of encourage revolution. And he then served as Lithuania's first kind of post-communist defense minister, and since then seems to have been involved in a number of fairly dubious dark schemes in close proximity with some rather sinister actors. He was for many years a co-owner of the key company that was involved in ferrying arms to Ukraine for the civil war in the Donbass, kind of off books, as it were, kind of flying under the radar. So, I mean, and yes, he's repeatedly named as being in direct contact with Hugh Ward, who drew up these plans. And but there are also indications, which were based on material we haven't yet reported on, that he's in direct contact with the Ukrainian security services. So again, that's another kind of tangential but still direct link between the people who drew this up and the alleged perpetrators.
And yeah, I'm curious about the Ukrainian special forces involvement in this. How integral were they in the planning of this, or was it really just the carrying out of this attack? Do we know?
Well, I mean, we don't yet know for certain. I mean, there was a very strange incident in which they're not in the immediate hours following this, after all of this celebration and the release of the commemorative postage stamp, the Ukrainian media reported on the fact that sources within Ukrainian law enforcement had stated it was categorically that it was the Ukrainian security services. The Ukrainian government seems to be backtracking significantly on that now, and one of Zelensky's chief advisors has said, "Oh no, actually this is a Russian false flag. It's very clear to see," and all this other stuff. I mean, whether they were just in charge of pressing the detonator, or whether they played a more active role, isn't certain. Although I think, as I say, look into the role of Bulgaria in this. I think that the Ukrainians, given the composition of Bulgaria's government, and indeed great swaths of public opinion, I don't think that the Ukrainians could operate there with such impunity. I mean, the British, by contrast, act with impunity everywhere they go. So again, something to look into.
One more question just on this piece, which is in the documents, and you don't have to tell me if your reporting hasn't uncovered it yet or it's not fully vetted, which is, do these documents point to other terrorist attacks in this planning similar to this, or is this an isolated plan that you were able to obtain these documents around?
Well, I mean, if you look at the proposal document, which is embedded in the article and is free to download, and other media outlets are welcome to report on it, and they're invited to, and I don't think they will. But the Kerch Bridge destruction, which was, that was the exact phrase used, that was one man, although it was the only one to have a dedicated annex outlining how it could and indeed should be done, and the various methods to achieve it, which kind of underlines how this was a key area of interest for Donnelly and his, kind of sinister transnational clique of military and intelligence operatives. But yes, the proposals were very wide-ranging and involved attacks on Russian shipping, moving mines surreptitiously so to unblock Ukrainian ports while damaging Russian vessels and all sorts. And again, each and every proposal is the kind of thing which would provoke a massive retaliation. The Russians have made abundantly clear over and over again that they would consider attacks on territory that they claim as theirs, which obviously includes Crimea, would be taken as attacks on the the Russian Federation itself, and therefore subject to massive retaliation. And again, there was a period of inactivity when after Alexander Dugin's daughter was blown up, and all sorts of other kind of connivances were carried out. And then now we are seeing those threats made very, very real, and there is no indication that this is going to stop anytime soon. There are videos circulating on the internet. I'm not, they haven't been fully verified as yet, but they seem to show Ukrainians fleeing large cities en masse, not only because of fear of the destruction, but also because they can't access water or electricity. Russia is doing now what the US and allied forces did in Iraq from day one, which is just target civilian infrastructure, absolutely cripple it, and wage an effective terror campaign on the local population. And I've seen some takes where people have kind of pro-Ukrainian supporters online have suggested that the strikes on Monday, the airstrikes on Monday were not actually particularly significant, and they were primarily symbolic, and they were for a domestic audience. You are absolutely kidding yourself if you don't think this damages Ukraine's warfighting capability. I mean, how are they going to be able to recharge electronic devices and communicate with each other? And that's just one small upshot of this wider campaign, which, as I say, shows no signs of abating and may continue for weeks.
Yeah, and earlier this afternoon we had attacks on multiple fuel depots as well as arms depots. So they are, and going after NATO targets as well, well-known NATO targets within the country as well. So this is just getting, it's going to be getting much, much worse, it appears, if these provocations continue. Kit Klarenberg, thank you so much for your reporting on this. We really appreciate it. Unbelievable journalism as always, from what Kit does and the team at the Grayzone. Thanks again, Kit, for joining us on the show.
Cheers, Clayton. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, the Grayzone, probably, to my mind, one of the greatest independent media publications doing fantastic investigative journalism. Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, who else do we have over there? Lindsay Snell and Kit Klarenberg. If I missed anyone over there, it's a small team, but they do amazing, amazing work. So
yeah, they have fans all over the world. In fact, Roger Waters mentioned him on the Joe Rogan podcast last week about a place that you can go for legitimate information about Syria and many places around the world. So, I mean, it is a bombshell report, right? To think about the repercussions of something that may have been orchestrated by the UK government.
Yeah, and to
what end, right? To what end? To hurt innocent civilians and bring about this repercussions.
Right, to further stoke war instead of, to his point, flying, Boris Johnson flying there on a regular basis, telling them to not push for peace and to sabotage any peace negotiations. I see a lot of people here in our chat, like, let us know right now if you're from the UK. I saw a lot of people just saying right now, you know, I'm from the UK and I'm ashamed of my country. Hey, welcome to the club. You know, like what? Right. How many of us are like super thrilled with our countries right now, especially our government, but
who just don't want to be behind this warmongering, who just want peace talks at whatever cost.
MI6, the CIA, these guys who are fomenting these, you know, this is the deep state, guys. This is what the deep state does. These permanent sort of intelligence complex that it doesn't matter who's in charge. Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, it doesn't matter. But Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the deep state is there, and they're driving this. They're driving us into the ground, so they can continue to push for war.